Welcome back to the Healthy Middle Ground podcast with me, Jen Curtis. I'm really, really excited about this podcast episode and the topic at hand. But I'll be completely honest with you, it's probably not a topic that many people are going to listen to. I try really hard to create podcast episodes based on what people really struggle with, questions that people have about fat loss, and just demystifying everything. But this week, I'm not going to do that. This week, I'm going to talk about a topic that I have been thinking about a lot recently, and it may not be listened to by many people, but even if one person listens to it and gets it, I'll be really, really happy. And at least I'm going to sort of get this out of my system, and it's very much a labor of love, and if it's helpful to somebody, then that's just a bonus. What I hope is that it really will resonate with some people, and hopefully I'm just going to have this episode at hand to send people that I want to introduce them to this topic, that I think people who I think are ready for it and who will be intrigued by it, who are intrigued by psychology and themselves and the way fat loss intertwines with who we are and our identities and all of that kind of fluffy stuff. So I'm an ideas person, right? I'm a concept person. I love understanding how things work, and I love frameworks that help me understand how the world works and how people work and how I work, honestly. And every so often, a new concept or framework comes into my consciousness and I become completely obsessed with it, and I see everything through that paradigm for a little while. And what I'm going to share with you today is exactly one of those things. It's a concept that I came across a couple of months ago, and basically everything I know to be true since then, I've kind of filtered through this sort of framework and way of seeing things. So I found it super duper helpful for understanding me, for understanding my clients, for understanding, just other people in my life and where people are at with things. It is really helpful for understanding how ready people are for coaching and how able they are to accept the change or to really look at themselves critically, because that's a big part of what coaching is. I always say to people that my coaching is basically broken down into three things: the nutrition part, the training part, and then the psychology part. And honestly, the nutrition and training part is really quite simple. And only makes up about 10 to 20% of what I actually do. The other 80-90% is the psychology. That's the really difficult part, that understanding people, understanding what motivates people, understanding why people do the things they do, and understanding yourself and other people is such a huge part of this process. And this particular framework has really helped me for understanding this. And this framework is the 5 stages of adult development. It's a framework created by a psychologist called Robert Keagan. He's not one of the big names. He's not really well known. And honestly, I've read some of his books and it's really dense and not easy to understand. But the framework that he created is so helpful for understanding ourselves as adults, trying to make sense of the world and how we make meaning in our lives. So what he proposes in this theory is that there are theories of child development, right? Like cognitive and emotional development in children. But there's kind of this unspoken assumption that once you reach adulthood, that's it, right? You stop developing. And then it's just about learning skills that you need to navigate your way through the world. But Robert Keagan argues differently. He says that there are actually 5 distinct stages of adult development, and they are not so much about what you know, they're more about how you know what you know and how you think and how you relate to the world. So he gives the analogy of, rather than seeing your mind as like a bucket that can be filled with lots and lots of knowledge and information, we want to change the bucket, right? We want to change your mind and the nature of your mind, and through understanding adult development, you can make cognitive and emotional leaps throughout adulthood that take you onto greater planes of awareness and understanding. So he breaks it down into 5 distinct stages. The first stage is the impulsive mind, which is basically a childlike state where, if any of you have you all have children, right? If you're listening to this, you watch your 4-year-old just go from being super duper happy to then banging his knee and crying, and then being super happy again, and then crying because his brother took something off him. They're constantly at the whim of this flux of emotions and physical and mental states that they're completely not in control of, and they're not aware of even. And regrettably, some adults do live in this state, although if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not. And I don't really work with people who are in this state. There's a small percentage of adults that don't really move past that childlike state. The second stage is the imperial mind, which is more in line with the stages of adolescence, where you start to recognize that you're a separate person from other people and that you have needs and wants and desires, and you kind of swing to being too egotistical and too kind of me, and you're making sure that your own needs are met, but you're not necessarily aware of other people's emotions or needs at the same time, and definitely not very good at weighing them up, like making sure that everyone's needs are met and that everyone kind of compromises a little bit. You're just kind of focused on getting your own needs met. Okay, obviously some adults are also in this stage, but again, it's most adults are in the stage 3, 4, or 5. So that's what we're going to focus on in this episode. So stage 3 is the socialized mind. Robert Keagan says that 65% of adults are in this stage. And what this stage means is that your choices and behaviors and habits are dictated by the people, the society, the environment, the culture around you. And you tend to do things or behave in ways that are just socially appropriate. You don't think about it too much. You're not really, making your own choices. You're not choosing what's right for you. You're just going along with the crowd. And most adults live in this space. The fourth order of thinking is called the self-authoring mind. And all of these stages, if you haven't figured it out, like build on top of one another and are stages of like increased developmental awareness. So the fourth stage, the self-authoring mind, is where you start to you have a really clear understanding of your own central core beliefs and values, and you make decisions based on what's right for you and for your family rather than what everyone else is doing. And you can clearly distinguish between the two, that this is what the majority does, but that doesn't necessarily mean I am going to do those things or we are going to do those things as a family. We do it this way, and you can clearly communicate why you do it that way instead of how everyone else is doing and what's wrong, quote unquote, with the normal way of doing things. Keagan says that something like 10% of adults get into this stage, and that it is really quite a minority of people who think on this level. It's also in many ways very similar to stage 2, right, where you're being very, very selfish, but it's not quite the same, because in stage 4, you're able to distinguish between your needs and others. You're able to compromise, and you're able to recognize why something is important to your own central values, rather than just sort of impulsively being like, well, I'm going to do this, fuck everyone else. No, in the fourth stage, you do appreciate that other people also have needs, and they may be different from yours, but you're very aware of that distinction. Whereas in stage 2, you just assume that everyone thinks like you and wants what you want. And then stage 5, I find a little bit difficult to even explain because I think I don't fully understand it yet. Keagan argues that only 1% of adults ever get to this level. And presumably I'm not at this stage. But the fifth stage of consciousness is the self-transforming mind. It's where you can recognize that there are lots of different perspectives, lots of different ways of seeing things, that no one sort of paradigm or model will fit everyone all the time. You can handle paradoxes and two different things being true at the same time. And you can also look at your own values and beliefs as objects, so you can hold them separately from yourself and evaluate them and decide, and you're still open to different ways of seeing things. So what I want to do in this episode is I want to talk about the ways in which I see these 5 stages of development showing up in people's fat loss efforts, and also the ways that it shows up in the coaching. Now, I think it's a really interesting topic, but I also think it's quite a confronting topic to really, really sit and think where I am in any particular area of my life. Am I stage 3? Am I stage 4? It's quite a confronting topic, but this is where real growth happens. I've learned a lot from looking at these 5 stages and thinking about where I am in these different stages. But it is quite a difficult thing to confront sometimes, to be like, oh, is this really, where I'm acting from? But in particular, I think it can really shine a light on why people get stuck and why people don't manage to move on. And it also really explains well why people get upset or take certain things personally or feel kind of uneasy about certain things. You might be in different stages at different points in your life or in different areas of your life. You might, as I go through this list or as I talk about these different areas, you might really, really relate to a few things in stage 3, but then also really, really relate to a few things in stage 4. And there might even be something in stage 5 that you relate to. But we're never fully in one stage, and we often are in different stages in different areas of our lives. Or you might find one part of fat loss, you're firmly in stage 4, but then there's certain places where you kind of regress to the socialized mind. You regress to doing what pleases everyone else. And this, if you are really open to this can only create awareness about what's motivating you and why, and are you really acting in line with your values? And at the end of the day, that's what this podcast is all about. It's about identifying your core values and beliefs, and then choosing habits and behaviors that are in alignment with those beliefs and values. Because the argument is that when you are acting in alignment with those beliefs and values, things flow and things feel quite easy. It's not always effortless, but it moves forward. Whereas when you're acting out of alignment with your beliefs and values, this is when you get stuck. This is when things feel like hard, feel like a real chore and a real drudgery. So a really good example of this is that if you are somebody who is like a true believer of body positivity, you think that it's all about like just loving your body, accepting that and loving your body, then anything to do with dieting, with efforts to lose fat, will make you want to die inside, and it will feel so heavy and so hard. Whereas if you are somebody who your central core values and beliefs are, you believe in hard work, you believe in discipline, you believe in subordinating your whims and desires to a greater goal or something that you want to achieve or a direction you want to go in life, then you are going to feel a lot of dissonance and friction when you act out of alignment with those values. Like when you go along with the crowd, for example, and just eat too much, and then you feel terrible, and then that will feel really, really hard for you to do, even though for someone else that might be the right way of approaching that particular situation. And so if you can correctly identify what stage you're at, and when a particular thing feels hard or you're not progressing with it or you feel stuck with it, you might find that you are in an earlier stage of development in that particular area to other areas of your life. I'll give you an example from my life. I don't want you to feel like it's a criticism of you or a judgment of you. I'm not describing any one particular person. I'm describing kind of like ways that people behave and act, and like patterns that emerge. I'm not talking about any one particular person, but I'm also talking about myself, right? I also have these sorts of tendencies, or I see when I fall back into previous ones. So in general in my life, I think I'm pretty firmly in stage 4. I'm in the self-authoring stage. I often do things very differently from other people, and I sometimes have to pay the price of not going along with the crowd or not fitting in, but I'm quite okay with that most of the time. But when it comes to social media, I often feel like I'm going along with things that, like posting what I think I should post or what is right. And often when it really clicks and when it really flows and when it really engages with people is when I'm talking from that place of self-authorship. Whereas when I'm showing up from that socialized mind of what will people think, what should I post, how should I say it, that never clicks and it never resonates and it falls flat. And this is also part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast episode, because I've been thinking about this topic so much. And I'm like, you know what? I want to do what really resonates with me, what really makes sense to me. And it feels like it flows. It's something I'm excited to talk about. Whereas sometimes if I'm showing up and talking about, I don't know, whether intermittent fasting is good for fat loss, it kind of bores me a little bit. And it doesn't feel like that place that's a little bit risky and a little bit dangerous, but also really, really aligns with me and who I am. Okay, so with that long introduction out of the way, which hopefully you got something from, let's go through these 5 different stages and how it shows up in fat loss and in the coaching process. So first of all, the impulsive mind. Not many people are here. I have worked with a few people who are just kind of living according to their moment-to-moment feelings, no plan, no structure to their day, using food, alcohol, or social media to numb temporarily, only to suffer the consequences downstream, and just kind of feel stuck in a rut. This is true for some individuals who have a lot of problems with food or very obese. But like obviously not everyone who's very overweight is in this stage at all. But to some degree, we all revert back to this. And I think emotional eating is a really good example of being in that impulsive mind, being like, I'm sad, I'm feeling bad, I'm going to have some chocolate because that's going to make me feel better and I deserve it and it's not fair. And it's kind of again, it's not judgment. I do it too sometimes, but it's kind of a childish place to be because it's like shitting in your own front garden, right? You're the only one who's going to suffer. You're the one who's going to have to clean up the mess afterwards. It doesn't actually make anything better. It temporarily gives you relief or numbs you from other negative feelings. But then when you kind of wake up from the haze or from the trance of like, I'm just going to do whatever I feel like because life isn't fair and blah, 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 then you're left with all of the negative consequences downstream of having just had a huge binge on chocolate, for example, or eaten too much. And now you feel bloated and uncomfortable, okay? And we all do this. We all revert back to this from time to time, but some more than others. People who are in this phase, or when we revert to this phase, it's often from a place of seeing feelings as the most important thing, and that it's always about unmet needs, and I must meet those needs in order to recalibrate. But people who are further down, have evolved beyond this stage, are not thinking in that way. We often recognize as part of adulthood that there are unmet needs that never get met, and that's just life, and it's tough cookie, but like that's how things are. And part of being an adult is dealing with that some of the time. Now, obviously, you can't go too far the other way and never have your needs met, but sometimes we just have to grin and bear it and get through it, and we don't always get what we want. The other way that this does show up in coaching that I can think of is in terms of instant gratification and struggling with delayed gratification. Now, we all struggle with this to some degree as well, but some people really struggle with this. For example, with weighing themselves. They'll say things like, yesterday was perfect, but my weight isn't going down this morning. And I have to remind them that you're not necessarily going to get a result this morning on the scale just because you had a good day yesterday. Meaningful fat loss is about long-term changes, is about trends over time. It takes time to metabolize the fat that you want to get rid of. And it's also about changing habits and doing something different, and that becoming your new norm over a long period of time. And again, we all struggle with this from time to time, like that frustration of like, oh, I really wanted to see a lower number this morning. But somebody who exists most of the time in a higher cognitive order will say, okay, well, yeah, I'm feeling frustrated. That's a little bit childish. I have to keep going. The results will come. Whereas for some people, that would be, a lot of people do this, right? Not necessarily on the coaching program, but they go, oh, I've been working so hard for a whole day and my weight's not even down. There's no point, I give up. And it's literally been a day and now they've given up on their journey. Or they've been dieting for 2 weeks, it's been going really well. Then they eat a bit too much at an event, the weight's up a little bit the next morning, and then they're like, oh, well, I've ruined everything. So that's when we're in that impulsive, like first order way of thinking. Second stage is the imperial mind. I'm just going to do what's right for me and fuck everyone else and fuck the consequences. I'm not going to talk about this so much because I don't feel like it shows up in my coaching very often. I'm going to talk mainly and move on now quickly to stage 3, or the socialized mind. And I think this is what shows up the most in the coaching, both because most people are in this stage. Okay, so again, Keagan says that 65% of adults are in this stage most of the time and don't ever move beyond this stage. And what I notice is that most of the problems involved in fat loss are either because people are firmly in this stage or because they have moved on to stage 4, but they are unintentionally regressing or reverting back to stage 3, and they feel a lot of friction. I didn't say this at the beginning, but Keagan also says that we feel the most friction or dissonance or like mental angst or discomfort with things when we are between 2 stages, when we're either progressing to a more developed stage of consciousness or when we're reverting back to a previous stage of consciousness in a certain area of our lives. Okay, so the way that the socialized mind shows up the most is, or the ways, is some people really want to look or feel a certain way, but then they also feel like they have to fit in with what's normal. Now I'm using like quote marks here to say normal, which you can't see, but we have to accept that normal in the modern world means overweight or obese. Something like 60% of adults, so the majority of adults in the Western world on average, are either overweight or obese. So if you want to be normal and you want to fit in with the majority of people, you need to be overweight or obese. So by extension, that means that if you want to be slim, lean, or a healthy body weight, you have to be abnormal, right? You have to not be like any other people. You have to eat differently to other people. And a lot of people struggle with this conflict. They want to be normal, be a normal human and eat like everyone else and not restrict themselves in any way, but they also want to be slim and fit. And this is where we find, on social media, loads of shortcuts and supplements and certain training programs and how I eat 3,000 calories a day and look how lean I am because I'm exercising 8 hours a day. We're always looking for the hacks and the shortcuts. Oh, it's my cortisol. Oh, it's my hormones. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. And we're looking for those things because that way we can still be normal. We can still be like everyone else. And we don't have to do the hard work of eating less and doing more exercise in order to look a different way. We can either just blame our circumstances or we've got something we can fix and then all of our dreams will come true and we don't have to change our habits or the way we think about things. So this shows up a lot when people struggle with the difficulty of wanting to make changes, but social expectations dictate their behaviors around food and exercise. So if a lot of people, for example, start getting to a point where they realize, wow, actually, eating so much food doesn't make me feel good. And when I'm reducing my food intake and eating certain things, I feel so much better. But then they still clash against the outside world and maybe what their husband's eating, or maybe going to their in-laws or their mother's house and be like, why aren't you eating this? Why aren't you eating that? You need to eat this. You need to eat that. And if we live in an obesogenic world, which we do, and if we live in a world where most adults are obese or overweight, if we want to not be overweight or obese, we have to eat differently to them. So we have to accept that tension between, we're going to be doing something different to other people. If we want to look different from other people or feel different from other people, we're going to have to do something different to them. Or people worry about, if I make time for exercise, people will judge me because I should be doing something else. I should be with my kids. I should be cleaning my house. I should be working. I should be earning money. So some people struggle with that idea of if I'm putting time aside to work out, people will judge me for that. It's not the done thing. Or not wanting to track calories because it's not socially acceptable, or the narrative is that tracking calories causes eating disorders. That it's not a fun, fashionable, sexy, elegant, kind of glamorous approach. It's not what people talk about and what people do. Most people, when people ask me how I lost weight and I'm like, oh, I just tracked calories and lifted weights, they're like, oh, okay, I'm not going to do that. And then they'll talk about doing something else, right? Some other fad diet. And it's not because of anything other than that is what is socially acceptable. And that is what other people think is the right way of going about things. And if you're in the socialized mind on that particular aspect, you're getting drawn by and influenced by what other people say rather than what is really right for you. I find that often another thing that shows up a lot is people who are in this stage, they are often following food rules that don't work for them. Like, for example, low carb, right? A lot of women are like doing low carb like half of the day and then ending up binging on carbs and not putting two and two together. Yes, all their favorite influencers do low carb and do like cottage cheese bread and blah, 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 but they're not realizing that it's not working for them, right? They're not able to make that jump to say, okay, well, it might be working for her and that's great, but for whatever reason, it's not working for me, so I have to try something else. Instead, they end up in a loop of like for years and years and years trying to do low carb, failing, feeling like a failure, and then being like, oh, well, I've got to do low carb again, or insert fad diet here. It doesn't need to be low carb. It's often things like just eating very low calories, right? A lot of women are in a cycle of under eating until about 4 p.m. Then they get home with their kids and then they just start eating everything. And then the next day, they're like, okay, well, I need to not eat anything again. They starve themselves half to death for half the day and then they binge the other half of the day. And they're in a cycle of like doing it because they think that's what they're supposed to do rather than stopping and going, hang on, this isn't working for me. What's not working and why? And let's change it. They're just in that kind of, this is what other people do, this is how I'm supposed to do it, I'm just gonna, if it's not working, it's because I'm not trying hard enough, it will eventually work. And then also some people, well, all of us find social eating very difficult. I've talked about this a lot, about we do tend to mirror other people around us, and when other people are eating, it's much harder for us to abstain, even if we're not hungry, right? It definitely happens for me when I'm on my own and I'm just like, I'm not hungry, so I'm just not going to eat. Whereas if I go to someone else's house, I can't, even if I'm not hungry, even if I don't feel like eating, I don't particularly like the food that's on offer, I'll still eat, because it's very hard to go against what other people are doing. Some of us, we all struggle with this to some degree, maybe apart from the most enlightened of us, people firmly in stage 5. I can tell you, I'm not there. I'm not one of them. But there are, I follow someone called Menno Henselmans, for example, and I think when it comes to that kind of stuff, he is in stage 5. He's like, I don't care. I'm doing it my way. I know this is right for me. I'm not giving in to any social pressure. I think you have to be quite disagreeable to be able to do that as well. But most people do struggle with this to some degree. To some degree, we have to reconcile this, that sometimes I'm going to go along with the crowd. Sometimes I'm going to enjoy food and just enjoy being with family and friends, and that's what's most important. But sometimes I might need to say, no, I'm not going to overeat here, and I do something different. And that's a little bit difficult, but I have to navigate that if I want to reach certain goals. Okay, so then I want to talk about how stage 3 shows up with me, okay, as a coach. Because I think this is also interesting, the tensions that come up. Coaching isn't easy, right? It's not just a straightforward process of, oh, just do this, just do that, that's it. It's a collaborative approach. It's a back and forth. It's a conversation where we're looking at what you're doing, we're analyzing it, we're figuring out what works for you, we're figuring out what doesn't. And some people really enjoy that process, but some people find it very, very, very confronting and find it very difficult, or take it very much as criticism or, judgment of them, which it absolutely isn't. It's about saying a collaborative approach together. Let's look at what you're doing. Let's do an audit of what you're doing. Let's figure out what's working and what's not working and why, and change what's not working. And if you are in stage 4, that is like, great, awesome, let's do it. But it can still be confronting. But when you or part of you is in stage 3, that can be very, very confronting and very difficult. I find that sometimes people in this stage worry a lot about disappointing me or about being a difficult or a bad client. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean the whole person is in stage 3, right? They might be firmly in stage 4 in other parts of their life, but when it comes to this particular process, they revert back to stage 3, and it's normal to worry what the other human on the other end thinks of you. Like, that's going to happen sometimes, right? We're humans, not robots, and we care about what people think of us. But some people are really, really worried to the extent that they won't do check-ins, for example, because if they've had a bad week, they'll just avoid the check-in so that then they don't have to actually get negative feedback or any sort of feedback on something that they deem as a failure, which isn't my job either. I'm not here to come along and say, you failed this week, you didn't do what you're supposed to do, just track your calories, just do this, just do that. That's not my job. My job is to say, okay, well, it didn't work this week, or you weren't able to track your calories this week, or you weren't able to lose weight this week. Like, let's figure out why. Like, what happened? What got in the way? What are the obstacles? How can we remove some of those obstacles? Are they mental blocks, or are they actual physical obstacles in your life? How can I help you to do that and sort through that? That's my job as a coach. Whereas a lot of people come into it thinking, Jen's going to be angry at me, Jen's going to tell me off for not doing it, Jen's going to be just try harder, you have to want it, that kind of thing. Some people really struggle with any negative or constructive feedback. Now, one thing that I always say to everyone is that I try to balance support and empathy and compassion with accountability, right? You need both things in equal, well, not always in equal measure, according to what the person needs. I need to support you. I need to meet you where you're at, understand what you're going through. But I also need to keep you accountable. Too much accountability with no support doesn't work. So if I'm just like, oh, you're not doing it, you need to sort your shit out, right? Just trying to berate people or just holding them accountable all the time and telling them to do better, that doesn't work, right? But too much support with no accountability, just validating people, telling them they're doing well, giving them a pat on the back when they're not actually doing what they need to do, with no accountability and no suggestion of how might we make changes to get you moving to where you need to go. That also doesn't work, okay? So we have to balance the two. But some people, I try to really adapt myself to the person, but it is part of my job to give negative or constructive feedback to everyone. And some people are really like, wow, you're so right. That's so interesting. I didn't even realize that about myself. Okay, great. I'm going to think about that. Some people feel absolutely shattered by the implication that they're not doing everything perfectly, right? So it kind of doesn't really make sense. They tend to rely very heavily on my approval and validation to stay motivated, which obviously a part of my job is motivating people. But if your motivation is fully reliant on me giving you positive feedback and building you up, it's never going to work long term, right? You have to have an internal locus of control and an internal locus of motivation, or you have to develop one, because it can't come from outside all the time. It can't just come from someone else cracking the whip. You've got to know how to get yourself to where you want to go. And part of the coaching process is holding people's hands. And part of the coaching process is handing that responsibility over to them, giving them the tools that they need to be able to then generate that motivation themselves. And another way that this shows up, again, this could just be in different people or just one area that this shows up for someone, but some people really struggle when I try to promote that internal locus of control and that internal locus of motivation. So they struggle when I try to promote collaboration or autonomy. So if I sort of turn it around and say, well, what do you think? What do you think you should do? What do you think you should eat? Or what do you really want? Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to go out and just stuff yourself silly? Do you want to be a little bit sensible but not track your calories? Or do you want to track your calories and be really on top of it? What do you want? They often struggle with that. There's no, I'm often, saying there's no one right answer. There's different approaches and different things will work for you. And different things will work for different people. And, one approach might work for you in a particular scenario, but then another day of the week, a different approach might work for you. They struggle with that degree of uncertainty and messiness. They want it to just do this, right? Just do what I say. Obviously, then that sounds nice and stuff. But if I tell them, okay, just track your calories. When you're going out for your anniversary tonight, just track your calories, just stay on track, don't exceed 1,500 calories. And then they want that directive, but then they don't stick to it. They overeat, and then they come back feeling guilty and shameful and da-da-da-da-da. So again, it's not a simple answer. I have to try and promote this kind of flexible thinking and flexible approach to it. But they can find that very, very uncomfortable because they want there to just be one clear answer that I tell them what to do, and that's it. And again, it could happen that somebody is very open to lots of different perspectives and whatever, but in this one area, just tell me what to do, right? And it could be that it's something that across the board, this is how they're approaching every area of their life and anything in between. And yes, we're still on the socialized mind because, again, this is what comes up for most people the most often. When you're operating from this place of the socialized mind, often what happens is people here don't have a clear understanding of their beliefs and values, and therefore they often want contradicting things. So just the most obvious example is, I want to lose weight, but I don't want to have to work hard for it, right? I don't want to have to change any of my habits. I want to be able to eat cake and I still want to lose weight. They often struggle with feelings of ambivalence because they'll say things like, I want to lose weight, I want to look leaner, but I feel like I shouldn't want that. And I think this is where they are struggling with what they feel is socially acceptable by their social group. So their social group is saying, you shouldn't, like, getting too lean isn't good for you. Often people are saying this because it serves their own self-interested bias, right? Like if most people around you are a little bit chubs, then they're going to say things like, I wouldn't want to be too lean. I wouldn't want to have that level of discipline around food, because it serves them to think that that's the case. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true either. It might be true for them, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for you. And I think when people are feeling too influenced or too much of a pull from social pressure, they often feel this ambivalence of like wanting different things and not being able to reconcile that. And so therefore they also struggle with motivation there, because it's very hard that 1 minute they want one thing, 1 minute they want the other, if they're not even clear on what they actually want. And more importantly, they also struggle with trade-offs. So, if you want to be leaner and if you want to look a certain way and feel a certain way and look muscular and lean and slim, like, you are going to have to change if you're not that way now, you are going to have to change certain things about your habits, about your relationship with food, and about your behaviors, right? You can't keep doing exactly the same thing and expect different results. That's obvious when you say it, but a lot of people find that hard to reconcile that within themselves. But likewise, if you want to just eat whatever you want, that is going to have certain consequences. Like, you're going to be a little bit overweight and you're not going to feel your best and you're not going to look your best. You're going to carry more weight than you want to, and you have to sacrifice this goal of being very lean. And people who don't have that clear understanding of what they want and why it's important to them, they struggle with ambivalence because they want both. And they struggle with the trade-offs. They struggle with the understanding that everything has trade-offs. There's no one way that you're going to be able to get everything you want, where you're going to be able to eat all you want and be slim, okay? That's what most of social media is about. It's about shortcuts and hacks so that you can eat all the bread you want and all the sugar that you want and still lose weight. Well, that isn't reality, right? You can't have that, right? You have to choose. And people in stage 3 of the socialized mind really struggle with that. And many of us, even if we've gone beyond that, we have moments of struggling with it. I definitely struggle with that some of the times, and sort of thinking, I don't want to be too hard on myself. I want to let loose a little bit. I want to enjoy a little bit. It's in direct conflict with my longer term goals of just doing it and getting to where I want to go. And often if I overeat or drink alcohol and feel shit the next day as a result, I'm like, well, there are consequences to my actions. I can ignore reality, but I can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. They come and they kick you in the butt later on. And I think another really common one is that they struggle a lot with cognitive dissonance and energy depletion because they're often choosing what suits other people rather than what's good for them. So they're often self-proclaimed people pleasers, what I call overly agreeable. So they're always going along with the crowd inadvertently and subordinating their wants and desires and goals to the group dynamic. And they don't always recognize it as such. Instead, they might interpret it as guilt and shame. They're sort of not doing what's in line with their values. They're acting in a way that's not in line with their values. They're feeling a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of discomfort, a lot of internal conflict, a lot of push and pull. But then the way they tend to self-report that, to me, is like feeling a lot of guilt and shame around things rather than recognizing, no, there's actually an internal conflict going on here. There's two different things, two conflicting things that I want, that different parts of me want simultaneously. And I have to reconcile those two parts a part of me that wants to please other people and go along and fit in with the crowd, and a part of me that wants something different for myself and feels that that's not right. And that internal conflict is hard for people to identify, let alone talk about. And so it often comes out as like, oh, I feel really guilty because I overate and I shouldn't have, and blah, blah, blah. But it's not really guilt and shame. It's just the language that we have available for these feelings and for these phenomenon. And this is why I think it's important to talk about topics like this, because it gives you more tools in your toolbox to describe what you're feeling and why. So an important thing here is that sometimes choosing something that's different from your habits or from what is socially acceptable requires quite a lot of energy and is quite difficult to do. But what most people don't realize is that acting and behaving in a way that isn't in line with your values and goals also requires a lot of energy. We just don't think about it because normally the energy is like back-ended. Like you then feel the energy depletion doesn't come in the moment, it comes afterwards, right? So if you want to behave differently from the group and stick to your own values and beliefs, it requires quite a lot of energy in the moment to say no to other people and to not go along with the crowd. But if you say yes when you really want to say no, and you eat and you drink and you didn't really want to and you're not really enjoying it, and then afterwards, that's when you feel the energy depletion and the burnout and the stress and the guilt and the shame. So you can't ever avoid paying this energy price. You can decide where you pay the price. Do you pay it in the inertia of getting things going and saying no and standing up for, you know, what you want and for advocating for yourself? Or do you pay it later on down the line in guilt and shame and feeling like, you know, you didn't act in alignment with your core values? And again, they feel a lot of guilt and shame around not living up to their expectations, even when those expectations cannot be met and are irreconcilable. Like, I want to be able to enjoy my life and eat as much as I want, and I also want to lose weight. They feel guilty that they're not managing to perfectly balance those two things all the time. But that's really like so idealistic and impossible that, you know, you sometimes you're going to maybe go too far one way, sometimes you're going to maybe go too far the other way, but it's never going to be completely perfect. And they often struggle with the idea of trade-offs, right? They want it all. I already said that. And then they also sometimes have kind of what I can only describe as a kind of self-imposed tall poppy syndrome. So tall poppy syndrome is like a social phenomenon where, like, especially women do this. They don't like someone standing out above the crowd. So imagine a field of poppies and there's just one poppy that's sticking up above thousands of others that are all the same. The tendency is to come and cut that tall poppy down, right? So that it's the same height as everyone else. And if intra-female competition is a really interesting thing that maybe I'll do another episode on, but women tend to impose this on each other. And some women impose it on themselves as well. Like, if I stand out too much, like, none of us want negative attention, right? We try to avoid negative attention, but many of us struggle when we get positive attention too. So if you're losing weight and getting slimmer and other people are saying, wow, you're getting really slim. Oh, maybe you're getting a bit too thin. Oh, but are you calorie counting? Oh, that's really unhealthy, isn't it? Oh, this sounds really restrictive. You start to, like, it gets in your head and it starts to, even though what they're doing is completely unhealthy and they're, you know, going either no carb, cutting all sugar and whatever out, and then swinging back to eating shit all the time, but whatever. So it gets in your head and you kind of have this self-imposed, it's like self-sabotage where you hold yourself back so that you don't stand out or attract attention, either negative or positive. And that's quite a complicated phenomenon, but I'm just going to leave it there. And then finally, they see it as a personal failure, not always able to ask why. Like, okay, why did that happen? Like, why did I overeat? What was going on? Was I feeling something emotional? Was I emotionally eating? Was I going along with the crowd? What was I really tired? Like, what was happening? Like, rather than sort of trying to analyze it and then learn from it and then implement the lesson, it's like it's just a failure and they just beat themselves up. Okay, so moving on to stage 4, right? The self-authoring person, or the person who's in this stage, at least in certain areas of their life. They have a clear understanding of their beliefs and values and why they want to lose weight or get stronger or get fitter or get healthier or make a change. And they choose habits that align with their deeper values. And this is often true across the board with their energy, with motherhood, with strength, with training, with nutrition, with lots of things. Their locus of control is inside them. They don't blame external circumstances. They recognize that no one's coming to save them. They have to do it. But they also have a very strong sense of why I want to do this and why it's important to me. And they can often articulate that, but they just have, sometimes it's just a sense of like, this feels right. She will often set her own goals and criteria for success. And they also have an ability, I switched between they and she there. These people often question whether certain cultural or diet norms actually serve them. So often they have a lot of realizations and insights about how fucked up other people's habits are and how fucked up the culture around food is. And rather than feeling like they have to fit in or shove themselves a square peg into a round hole, they actually feel very clear about, I don't want to do that, Susan. I'm going to do my own thing. Thank you very much. And it doesn't even tempt her. She doesn't even feel like drawn by that. Maybe it's in the office watching how some people eat or listening to the crazy diet that their colleague is on. And they're just like, what is happening? People are so crazy around food. And I find that these clients, I really love working with everyone, and I love helping anyone go through wherever they're at and, you know, have realizations and insights. But what I love about this particular client will often write to me saying in kind of righteous indignation, she'll send me a message sort of saying, oh my God, you won't believe the conversation that I had with Sally at the office. Oh my God, you won't believe how my mother-in-law does it, or how this person does it, or how they think about it, or they were like, oh, just cut out all sugar, and oh, well, fats are good for you, so you can have as much as you want. And I obviously really enjoy those conversations. I have those realizations myself on a daily basis as well. And there's sort of no desire to fit in with that and do low carb because Sally's doing low carb. You're like, okay, I'm not doing that because that's ridiculous. And often what comes with it is a sense of righteous indignation. Like, how can people live like this? How can people think like this? And a feeling that like the way I do it is right and the way other people do it is wrong. And I definitely have that, right? And I share that with a lot of you that are on this journey as well, sort of feeling like, why can't everyone just kind of like learn the basics of nutrition and everyone's lives will be so much easier? This type of person also finds what actually works for them. They're able to kind of look at biofeedback like hunger or what the weight's doing and look at their habits side by side and say, okay, cause and effect, what's working, what's not. Like if, for example, I ate this meal, but then I was hungry 2 hours later, instead of beating themselves up and saying, oh, I did the wrong thing and now I'm hungry and I mustn't eat anything. They say, okay, something must have been wrong with that meal. I didn't eat enough. Maybe I didn't have enough carbohydrates. Maybe I didn't have a big enough portion. Maybe I ate the wrong kind of thing. Why am I hungry 2 hours later? And then they fix that problem. They find what actually works for them through trial and error, and they're very good at tolerating the error part of this process, right? When they get things wrong, they just see it as data and feedback from their environment, and then they use it to implement a different strategy to see if that works. Many people can't do this. They make a mistake on their diet and they think, oh, I'm a loser. I'm like, I can't, I'll never be able to do this. I'm crap at dieting. I always get it wrong. I always slip up, and they beat themselves up, and then they fall back into old habits rather than just building on the mistakes that they made and changing things, seeing it as feedback and finding what actually works for them. And these people tend to get really good results because they're about, okay, how do I get my calories down to 1,500 calories without being hungry? And if I tweak this and if I tweak that, does that make me hungrier? Does that make me less hungry? They see it, they're very curious about the process and don't worry about any failures because they see it as getting a step closer to success. They don't mind doing things differently to other people and being a bit different from other people. They might struggle a little bit when they feel judgment from other people. Like, you know, how can you think that way? Like, you get it so wrong the way that you think about food. Why can't you think like me? Rather than thinking, okay, like everyone's where they're at. It doesn't matter. I don't need everyone to approve what I do or agree or understand. That's where they can struggle a little bit, but they're already in a much better place if they're able to say, okay, this works for me. Just because something works for someone else doesn't mean it's going to work for me, and I have to find what works for me. So the ways that it can then show up with me, with these people who are in stage 4, the self-authoring mind, who are very kind of independent thinkers, who are very, very self-aware, very self-authored. Where it shows up, where there's friction in the coaching, I find, is that they may be more guarded in the coaching. So they may be less likely to open up, and not necessarily for bad reasons, but often because they need to decide for themselves what they think. And it's more important to them, my input, that it's what they think is more important to them than my input. So, in an ideal world, well, I guess this would be more stage 5. They would also be very, very open to my input and be very curious about it and very able to take on board anything that resonates and makes sense to them, and be able to disregard whatever doesn't work for them without any sort of emotion about it, right? But I don't think I'm completely there, with being able to do that. I've worked with a coach. I'm working with a coach now. And I definitely find a bit of friction when I get told what to do or told that I'm doing something wrong. He's usually right, but that doesn't mean that I don't find it like a tough pill to swallow. I find it very informative and I find it very helpful, but it still is difficult to take on board sometimes. I can't reply straight away. I need to sort of let it settle and kind of digest the information first and decide how it aligns with my values and who I am and my identity first. And then I can sort of reply with a cooler head. So that's already a good thing to be able to do. But that's sort of how people in this stage think about things. And again, I don't mean to blow my own trumpet that I'm in stage 4 or whatever, because there are definitely parts of me where I'm not, right? This weekend was my son's birthday party. I made a post about how I went along with the crowd and I did something that was terrible for all of us. I also drank alcohol because I wanted to kind of fit in, and I don't usually drink alcohol because it doesn't do me any good. And what I recognized coming out of that weekend and coming out of my son's birthday party was the reason why I felt so much discomfort within myself is because I was regressing to being in the socialized mind, doing things, listening to my own intuition and doing what's right for me and my family. So that's just an example of when you can be in one stage but regress to another stage, even though you spend most of your time in one stage. Anyway, other ways that this comes up in the coaching with me is this kind of person in stage 4 may resist being told what to do and prefers collaboration and autonomy, which is also a very good thing. This isn't putting a judgment on it saying it's good or bad. It has pros and cons. So someone in the socialized mind in stage 3 wants more directive. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to eat. Tell me how to think. Tell me how to feel about this. Whereas somebody who's in the self-authored, fourth order of thinking, they are more don't tell me what to think. Give me guidance and give me your opinion and input. I value that, but I still need to figure out what is right for me, which I think is a good thing. I try not to tell people exactly what to do, but it can be difficult sometimes when it can go too far the other way and be very stubborn or obstinate about, well, I already know what's right for me. I've already identified what's right for me, but it's not actually right for her. It's not actually working for her. She thinks it does, but she's kind of certain and set on this is the right way for me and I'm not going to change this. And sometimes that can take a little bit more coaxing to say, well, maybe it's not working and maybe you could try this and maybe you could tweak this and that and let's talk about why it might not be working. It's usually a little bit harder to sort of break down the guard, but that's normally the obstacle that comes in the way in the coaching. So sometimes she has a set way of doing things. She's like, this works for me, but it's actually not helping her get to her goals, and it's not serving her, it's getting in her way. So this sort of person can normally tolerate paradoxes and trade-offs, but only up to a certain point. So they're very good at sort of saying, okay, this is true, this is also true, but, or maybe what I do on one occasion isn't what I do on another occasion. They can deal with nuance and complex ideas and different things being right for different people at different times. So another sort of positive is that they like to create order and structure and fit new information into that paradigm. So I often find that rather than replying back to me saying, oh, I found that really helpful, or oh, wow, that's fascinating, I never thought of that, they'll say things like, they'll repeat back what I said to them, but within their own framework of understanding. And whereas I might have just given them one piece of information, they might give me back information that fits into a wider framework, which is a great thing to be able to do. And you can see her own mind working and trying to make sense of this new information and fit it into the paradigms that she already has, or maybe even fitting them into new paradigms and adapting to new paradigms. So an example might be if you are somebody who is already in stage 4, the self-authored mind, and you're doing a lot of this independent thinking, but this is the first time you've ever heard of this 5 stages of adult development. And now you're like, oh, okay, like fitting old information that you already have that isn't wrong, but you're fitting it into a new paradigm. That's what I'm talking about here. And that's the process I went through when I learned these 5 stages. I then went, okay, well, how does this fit into that? How does, this interaction fit into what happened? And how does this scenario fit into what happened? How does this coaching example fit into this paradigm? So that might be an example of how you're kind of making sense of old information and new information and putting them into a framework that fits together. But the downside of being somebody who creates order out of chaos, right? You're somebody who creates structure and needs things to fit into a structure, but they tend to then struggle with the unknown parts that don't fit neatly into an overarching meta structure that incorporates everything. And I'm absolutely describing myself here. I'm like super happy if this fits in, if I can make a framework that fits in, that applies to everything all the time and it covers everything. But then as soon as there's like a piece of information that doesn't fit that framework, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know where this fits in. I don't know how to hold this like uncertainty or unknown. It feels like a chaotic piece that I don't know how it fits in. And they can sometimes be overly rigid with things that have worked in the past. They sort of say, okay, this works for me. I like to have this breakfast, or I like to have, a piece of dark chocolate, or I like to add more oil to my salads. And it's quite hard to convince them that actually, these things might not be working and you might need to reel back on that. And I think, so just to talk about stage 5, the self-transforming mind for a moment, because again, only 1% of people ever even get to this. I think that some of us, once you learn this framework, like many of us have glimpses of it. I think I have glimpses of it, but I'm not there. Like I'm not operating from that place most of the time. Although Robert Keagan says that we all think we're further along this process than we actually are. So maybe I'm kidding myself and I'm actually much more in the socialized mind than I think I am, and just kind of like getting glimpses of stage 4. But anyway, I think for most of the time I'm in stage 4 and getting these glimpses of stage 5, and I see glimpses of stage 5 in some clients as well. That when you have those moments of insight where you're not only accepting of but appreciating of the many paradoxes in fat loss and training and life, where you can hold 2 different things that are true at the same time, but they are conflicting information. They understand that there's no single plan, identity, or phase that defines you. It's all part of your evolution and growth. So like you don't have this fixed identity that like you need to find, right? Like to find yourself, to find out who you are. Your personality, your preferences, everything about you is evolving all the time, and it's never going to come, hopefully it will never be static, and you can sort of like define the boundaries of it. It's always going to be ongoing and evolving. They can hold tension between self-acceptance and growth, as well as many other paradoxes. So they can say, I love myself for who I am. I think I'm great. I have a lot of self-confidence, but I want to improve this area of my life. But I want to lose 5 kilos. But I want to get really, really strong at the gym. They can hold the paradox in their hands, and they're okay with that and even appreciating of that. They very much see slip-ups as information and not as failure. And they might explore on a kind of, ideas, concepts-based level, how diet culture, motherhood, and identity all intersect, and how social and political things come into diet, and how it's all kind of interwoven. It's not just like a separate thing. They all kind of influence each other, and they don't see things in black and white. They can see faults. For example, they can see faults in toxic diet culture and in body positivity. They're not like, one way is the right way. They can see that there's shortcomings and things that are wrong in both of those kind of ideologies, and they can find something that's kind of a healthy balance in the middle. So they're the ways that it shows up in the coaching. And I was going to do a kind of another part, more subtle ways it shows up in the coaching, but actually I think there's only really one really important way that's worth talking about, and that is that sometimes you have very conscientious but overly agreeable individuals who really struggle because they're trying to do it all and live up to what they think of as society's expectations of what they should do and how they should look and what they should be, how much they should be doing. So often these individuals who are highly conscientious, highly intelligent, and they are for the most part in stage 4, but their agreeableness, which is one of the big 5 personality traits that I talk about in my personality podcast, it drags them back. This is what we call people pleasing, right? It drags them back into the socialized mind. Now, some people are more agreeable than others. I tend to be quite a disagreeable person. Like, I'm quite high in disagreeableness as a personality trait. So I struggle with that a lot less than other women who are much more agreeable. And it's not necessarily because they are doing something wrong. It's just that they're very prone to and very susceptible to other people's perceptions and feelings, like more so than I am. And they want to make sure that other people are happy. So they often get dragged back into the socialized mind. And what I find is, like, leaving diet aside for a moment, because I've talked about how that happens there, but they tend to, in other areas of their life, they tend to often override their own values and beliefs to please others, fit in, or live up to impossibly high expectations. And then they find it very hard to say no, and they often give in to social pressure. And then as a result of that, they experience a lot of cognitive dissonance and emotional depletion, not just because they're so busy, right? Their lives are so busy and they're doing so much. It's because they're busy doing things that are out of alignment with their values, which is very painful for the psyche. So they're always experiencing this kind of like needing to process everything and needing to recover from certain things, because they're not only packing their lives to the brim, which I think is a problem in the modern day world, but they have this sense of like doing it not because they like it that way. They're doing it because they're trying to fit in with everyone else's expectations of what they should do. And they have a lot of FOMO. And so they're doing this stuff, but then it's then making them very, very tired, and it's not really what they want to do, and it's not in alignment with their beliefs and values. And it often means that they have to sacrifice their actual beliefs or behaviors and habits that are in alignment with their beliefs and values. So I find that the most common way that this comes up is they have ridiculously busy lives, non-stop events, weekends are always packed to the brim, tons of like after school activities and clubs, hectic work schedule, lots and lots of trips all over the place, but not actually doing the things that are most important to them. So consistently they'll say, I didn't have time to work out this week, or I only did one short workout this week. And they don't actually have time or energy to do the diet or to work out, because their lives are so filled to the brim with things that don't actually matter to them as much as the other things. So they're always in this cycle of constantly having to put to one side the things that really matter for them, because they don't have time for them, because they're filling everything up with things that they think they should do and they don't really want to do. So they feel a lot of ambivalence because they really want to lose weight and they want to, but they're not willing to think about what they're willing to give up. They're not willing to give up the hectic lifestyle because they're worried about what other people will think. Like, if I drop clubs for my kids, will my kids be disappointed? If we go on less holidays, well, if my family wants to go on holiday and I say we don't have the money or time for it, or we just need to chill, like they don't have any downtime to rest and recover because they're constantly packing it to the brim. And sometimes they also have to sacrifice the kind of conscious and connected parenting that they want because of this like crazy schedule that they're trying to keep up with, but again, isn't making them or anyone else happy. It's just what they feel they have to do. And then they're constantly sacrificing the things that are important to them. And what I find that's really important for these types of people is kind of a minimalism about stuff, about time, learning how to say no to certain things. Like, you can't just do it all, right? You can't just cram it all in. You have to decide what you're going to say no to so you can say yes to other things. So if you feel like your health and stress levels and your connection with your kids is a priority, there are going to be things that you have to say no to in order to make time for those things and to make sure that you and your kids and everyone else has the energy for them. And it's the same as like decluttering a cluttered home, right? If you want to have a tidy, clutter-free home, it's not just about better organizing. It's about having less stuff. It's about deciding what you say no to, what things you tell the kids you're not buying and they can't have, or what things you decide not to buy so as not to have a cluttered wardrobe, or getting rid of things that you don't use because then you don't use them and you're just, so it's the same concept of like decluttering and minimalism that's applied to your schedule and your time. And then if you start saying no to some of the things that you don't want to do anyway, you then have all this time and energy freed up for the diet, for working out twice a week in order to build muscle and get more lean and have more visible muscle, or feel stronger and actually make progress in the program. So it's a lot about trade-offs and a lot about what you're willing to sacrifice, not just what you're willing to do, because you can't just always cram more in. So I find this often gets in the way of fat loss, and it's not directly about how we're thinking about fat loss. It's about how the rest of our life is organized and how we're thinking about the rest of our life that doesn't allow us to have the bandwidth for these other things. And it's also fine to say, once you realize there's a trade-off there and you're like, no, I like the busy, hectic schedule and I don't want to give that up in order to be able to be healthier or to be thinner or to be fitter or to be stronger or to be more muscular. Like, I don't think that's a worthwhile trade-off. That's also totally fine. But then you can operate from that level and give up the idea of like the fat loss and the whatever, because you can't have it both. You can't have it all, right? So that's also making a decision, and it's one that aligns to your values. So just because for me, for example, it's important to have quite a quiet life. One of the sayings that I operate from and remind myself of daily is, I'm not saying no because I'm too busy. I'm saying no because I don't want to be too busy. And that is really, really important to me, to have a buffer zone in my time so that if a kid gets sick, if I get sick, if something happens, I then have some time to deal with that rather than being filled to the brim and then the car breaks down and now I've got no bandwidth to deal with that. I like having that little bit of buffer zone, but I'm not saying that's necessarily right for everyone, but it is right for me. And if I fill things to the brim, I feel a lot of energy depletion because I'm just too busy and I don't have any downtime and time to process things, which I do need. But I also will feel a lot of cognitive dissonance because it's not in line with my values and goals. Okay, I think I'm going to leave that there. That's over an hour. If you're still with me, thank you so much for listening. That was my massive brain fart for today. I really needed to get that out. I really needed to organize my thoughts on this topic. I really needed to make this podcast episode to share with anyone who this does come up in conversation sometimes. So I really hope you found it helpful. I'd love it if you would subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify, whatever you're listening to. If you'd leave a comment, like either give me a question that you want me to answer about this or anything else, a topic for a future video, or just any sort of thoughts you have on this topic if you've listened to this point. So thanks for listening.